just by way of review, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it's so important to know the framework of the overall book. The majority of the book of Revelation from chapter 6 through 19 deals with the tribulation. And we're in that overall section now. And it's important to know that there is a framework. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. So reminds me of college. You know, I started and I was a freshman, had to wear a little stupid hat or something. They don't do that anymore. And then in the middle, I got an AA, and then I went on to the big college. And so that was the middle. And then when I graduated, I remember throwing all my books in the air and said, done with that. I don't want any more of that. Of course, I did go back to school, but I had enough. So anyway, it's kind of like that. A is the beginning, B is the middle, C is the end. And every event can be hung on one of those points or related in some way to one of those points. So if you read 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, because all of those appear in the Revelation, the 3.5 years is usually a time times and half a time. And Daniel, it says that. So we put that together as 3.5 years. In the beginning is the rapture. In Revelation 4:1, John is taken to heaven symbolically as a type by the sound of a trumpet and a shout, which goes right along with 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4, the two major rapture passages. And the first thing that happens, because there's no evangelists, no Christians on earth to evangelize, is that he seals 144,000 Jews. He seals the Jews because the purpose of the tribulation is strictly for the Jews. Gentiles will be saved, but that's not the purpose of it. In the Old Testament, it's called time of Jacob's trouble or the refiner's fire. But it's the time for all the Jews, the Jewish nation, to receive Messiah. They rejected him the first time, but they will receive him the second time, as it says in Zechariah 12 through 14. In the middle point, Satan is cast out of heaven, and he comes and inhabits in some way the Antichrist, and then imposes the mark, whatever that is. I have my theories, but there is a definite mark of some kind because the word says so. Those people who take it cannot be saved. The people who don't take it will be hunted down and killed, most of them. They will try to flee. And then you have, at the very end, after 3.5 years of what's called the Great Tribulation, you have Jesus coming back and everybody seeing him. The Greek word is parousia. In fact, we were watching some old show last night and they used that term. I was just perusing. My mother used to say that. Just means looking around. Everybody's going to be looking around and see him coming, parousia. Yes, ma'am.
There's multiple theories, but I just wanted to try and see. This is showing that the rapture there's no pre-tribulation rapture for this. Correct. This is the first 3.
I teach and believe that although you might call it pre-tribulation, I call it initial tribulation. The reason is because I believe as soon as the church is gone, Satan is not going to waste any opportunity. Satan will never waste a good crisis. Maybe that's a better way to say it. So in other words, some people say initial tribulation. Oh, well, the rapture happens and there's some unknown amount of time and then the tribulation happens. It doesn't make any sense to me. The word says you should not be ignorant of Satan's devices. Know your enemy. Know what he's like. He's not going to wait around. So, Christians are gone. Oh, I got this great opportunity. I think I'll go on a vacation, then I'll come back and see about doing something. That's men might think like that, but the devil doesn't. So it's obvious to me that as soon as the rapture occurs, that initially the first event of the tribulation, the rapture, and immediately the tribulation begins. It seems logical. It seems scriptural to me. I see no evidence there's any time between. But if you have other thoughts, that's fine. As you mentioned, there are a number of theories. I've gone through all of them over the last 50 years, and what I'm teaching now is what I've come to, which I believe is accurate. feel free to call me on it. If anything I say, you go, I don't know about that. Where is that? I'll be glad to show you where that is. The problem is sometimes I've spent a whole hour talking about that in the past, but I'll be glad to do it again. This is an ongoing class. Okay, so just by way of review, you remember when I was in school, the teacher would go up to the board and say, okay, we're going to review first. And there's a reason, and the Word of God says that we're supposed to go over and over the Word, because a lot of times we forget. Maybe you don't. I do. I forget stuff. So I've forgotten so much. I know less now than I used to know. I used to really know some things, you know. I try to remember. I'm going, I know I used to know that, but anyway. So hopefully I'm starting to remember a few things with God's help. When I went through
your wife's.
Oh, you got one? Oh, well, takes one to know one, doesn't
Yes,
it?
sir.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That's right. The wife is the one who God gave us, says helpmeet. There's probably other descriptions of that, but basically whip you into shape and keep you in line. Okay, so
It works,
yeah.
doesn't it, dear?
Yeah, without the wife, I couldn't. But first of all, without God, I can't do anything. Second of all, without the wife, I can't do anything. So, yeah, you know, not everybody's fortunate enough to have a wife, but it's a good, what does the word say? It's a good thing if you find one. I think it says that. Let's go to chapter 11, verse 1. I like to stay in the word, but often I depart with additional information. So if I wander too far away, my wife gives me one of those looks, and I try to reel it back in. So sometimes I pontificate. I think that's the word, pontificate. Yeah. I was given a reed like a measuring rod and told, okay, well, so first of all, a reed like a measuring rod. We got to transport ourselves back 1900 years. So what would it mean to these people? Well, believe it or not, they didn't have laser measuring tools. So, you know, they would have a stick, a reed, and you know, and they'd have, you know, mark it up, and that's you know, that was their construction method, right? So they had a method, they had a way of measuring, but it was different than today. So in their vernacular, in the way that they understood it, they were told to take a rod, a measuring tool, go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers. Okay, so this is in your face. People say, oh, I don't believe there's going to be a temple rebuilt. Well, then we got a real problem here. So number one, what was the first temple ever built? David was told, because he had been a warrior, he couldn't build it, but he had his son do it. And his son's name was Solomon. So it was the greatest temple of all. And when Nebuchadnezzar came in 586, and he came first a few years before, but he finally came back in 586 and destroyed the city and the temple. He took all the captives away with him, and that was the first diaspora. And he took Daniel and his pals, the young guys, the young intellectuals. He took to Babylon, and we know about them. We read their books. And so they were there for 70 years. And then he foretold that after 70 years, Jeremiah did, that they'd go back. Sure enough, they went back. And the old men, there were still some really young guys taken away that were old men when they went back. It says they wept. In other words, they had rebuilt the temple. It was actually called Zerubbabel's temple. And it was the second temple. But it was pitiful compared to the original, and the old men wept that saw it. Okay, so the first temple was Solomon's, the second temple was Zerubbabel's, and later on, this Idumean, basically an Arab, Jordanian king, Herod, refurbished it and added on to it, but it was still the same temple. It was the second. It wasn't a third temple; it was the second one added on to, and so that's the second temple. And so then the Romans came in 70 AD, and they destroyed the city and destroyed the temple. So the second temple is gone. So now the Jews are waiting for the third temple. At least the Orthodox ones are waiting for the third temple, since the second one is long gone. And so that's going to happen. And this is what it's talking about. As predicted, there will be a third temple. And so these two guys are told to go, these two prophets. I don't supposed to use guys. The wife says that's out. Okay. These two prophets, who I believe, I have no doubt, they're Moses and Elijah. Some people say Enoch, but he's not even dispensational. He was in the dispensation of conscience. He wasn't even in the Old Testament law. But at any rate, I can prove that easily because these two prophets are the same guys that appear. I did it again. Okay, just in your mind, if I say guys, what do we say?
Prophets.
Thank you. Okay, so these two prophets are the ones that appeared with Jesus in Luke 9:28-36. Everybody knows, I think everybody knows the story where the disciples went up to the top of the mountain, and while they're up there, Jesus appeared in his glory. Okay, in his glory means as he's going to appear when he comes back. And who is he going to come back with? The two prophets that appeared with him in the cloud in the glory, just like he's going to come back. And who are they? It names them. There's no, oh, I wonder who they are. No, it flat out names them. They are Moses and Elijah. And if you look at the miracles that they do, they're exact same miracles that were done by Moses and Elijah. In case the Lord says, okay, in case you're not getting it, let me show you what the miracles are, then you'll get it. Of course, every Jew would have understood that because they heard the law and the prophets all the time. So, so these guys represent, this is I think God's humor. God has a sense of humor. So, when Jesus was witnessing to the Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes and the rest of them, they said, like, who's this guy? Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? We follow Moses and the prophets. Well, the Jews at this time are going to do the same thing. We follow Moses and the prophets. Who are these guys? Who do these prophets think? Men. They don't even think they're prophets. Who do these men think they are? And so the irony, God's humor, is he's going to give them the law and the prophets to witness against them. So that's why these two fellows are coming back. So Moses died, but they don't know where his body is. However, God's done it. He's resurrected him, or he's done something. And Elijah, of course, went up in a fiery chariot. He never died for sure. So however God does it, he's bringing the two prophets back at this time. And so you have to say to yourself, well, why is that even necessary? Some people erroneously think these are two or the first 3.5 years. They're not. It's obvious why they're not. Because you got 144,000 Jews going through the entire earth, witnessing to everybody. You don't need any special witness to come on. They got 144,000 of them. However, once Satan inhabits Antichrist and he says, take the mark or die, all the righteous people flee. Some are caught and beheaded, but the rest of them flee. It's actually the third diaspora, dispersing into the world. So what happens here is that God has to have, much like Moses and Aaron were before Pharaoh. It's very similar. God likes to repeat these patterns. So nobody would, at this point, with Satan inhabiting Antichrist and knowing sure death if they don't worship him, nobody would come before Antichrist and dare witness against him. Just like in Pharaoh's time, nobody would go before Pharaoh and witness against Pharaoh, except for two prophets. Okay, and so therefore, these two fellows, these two prophets, will come before Antichrist, and they will constantly be speaking against him, just like Moses and Aaron. And the whole world will hear this, and they'll hate them. Because just like the Egyptians hated Moses and Aaron, because they don't want to hear the truth. They're all sold out for Antichrist. They don't want to hear anything else. So these guys have the chutzpah to go before Antichrist and tell the truth. For 3.5 years, they're the only witnesses in the earth against Antichrist. And we're going to see what happens at the end of that 3.5 years. So remember I told you A, B, and C, first 3.5, last 3.5. Well, this has to be the last 3.5 because everybody else has run out into the desert. They're not in Jerusalem witnessing against Antichrist. They're running as far away as they can get. Only these two prophets have the guts to do it. Okay, so but exclude the outer court, verse 2. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the holy city for 42 months. Remember, Daniel in chapter 2 had a vision of an image, a colossus, a great figure of a man, head of gold all the way down to the toes. And at the end of time, this stone not cut with hands will smash the end of Gentile power. So what is this telling? This is clearly telling us that Gentile power will not end until the end of the tribulation. It clearly says, so if somebody has any other theory, they're obviously not aware of this passage, because it says here that the last 3.5 years, the two prophets will witness against Antichrist, and the Gentiles, the ungodly powers of the world, non-Jewish powers, will continue on until the stone not cut with hands smashes them, which happens at the very end at Armageddon, chapter 19 of Revelation. Jesus comes back. The outer court has always been for the Gentiles. So, you can say, oh, the Gentiles have always been there, even in Paul's time. Yes, but this is different. It means the entire temple complex is going to be overrun by the Gentile powers, much like it was by the Romans and the Greeks. They also took it over. And without getting too deep into historical weeds, that's why we have Hanukkah, because the Seleucid Greek ruler Antiochus Epiphanes went in there and slew a pig on the altar. The Gentiles were overrunning the temple at that time. And even at the time of the Romans, Pompey, in 67 BC, went in there and killed the priests and took over the temple. So the Gentiles over time have taken it over, but the Gentile era was not over yet, because there are 7 successive Gentile empires predicted. So this one will be the final empire predicted. Some people call it revived Roman Empire. It'll really be a world empire. But what we're going to see is that at point C, when Christ comes back, the parousia, every eye will see him, and at that point, these type of things will no longer be in effect. And I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days. Remember, I said there's different time factors. They're all the same. They're just expressed differently. Clothed in sackcloth. Of course, that's traditional Old Testament mourning clothes. They're mourning, M-O-U-R-N. And so they're going to be confronting Antichrist and the world about what's really going on. They are the 2 olive trees. Zechariah mentions olive trees, and the 2 lampstands. Obviously, they're the ones shedding the light. The whole world's dark, but these 2 are sharing the light, projecting a light on the world. And they stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone tries to harm them, this is important, because this is a real part of why these guys are the last 3.5 years and why they're doing what they're doing. In other words, just like Moses and Aaron, I love the movie 10 Commandments, but Pharaoh would always say, "Go get them, go get these guys." Once they've left, he wouldn't say anything while they were there. He's afraid of them. Once they went out, go get those guys, and they never could get the guys. Prophets. They could not get them, right? If you remember the movie. So even at the end, he sent his whole army and himself, according to 10 Commandments. All of his power went after him, and he still was not able to kill them. So in the movie, I think it says, "Go and get Moses, bring his body back," or whatever, So this history is repeating itself in a sense. So what's going to happen is that these 2 prophets will further identify themselves by the miracles they're doing. It's quite clear if you study the Old Testament and know the history of Moses and know the history of Elijah. So it says, if anyone harm them, fire comes from their mouth and devours their enemies. Okay, so who brought down fire and destroyed his enemies with fire? The famous prophet, the most famous prophet of all prophets, Elijah. So who do we think one of these fellows is? It has to be Elijah. Okay. In case the scene on the Mount of Transfiguration was not clear enough for you, where they named him by name, he further goes on and says what the characteristics are, which will identify them. This is how anyone who harms them must die. And I gave a reference there. You can go to Elijah in 1 Kings 18, 20 through 40 and read that story. Oh, I have the scene out of 10 Commandments. I love that scene. These have the power to shut up the sky, verse 6, so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. Does this sound like anybody we know?
Moses.
Is it Moshe? I think the Jews call him Moshe. There was a famous general, Moshe Dayan. That means his name was Moses. So anyway, so we see that Moses in Exodus chapters 7 through 10, his exploits are detailed and everybody pretty much knows what they are. So that identifies them in case there's any quandary at all. Chapter 11, verse 7, now when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will attack them and overpower and kill them. So this is really strange. So for 3.5 years, nobody can touch them. And then some kind of fallen angel, demonic entity, evil personage comes out of the abyss. And I think what we have to do is go back to see the last reference in Revelation to the abyss, abuso, which is Apollyon, also called Abaddon. So we see that it's probably that spirit entity. And so when it says the beast, keep in mind that the beast, therion in the Greek, just means a wild animal, but the beast is multifaceted. The beast is the Antichrist. The beast is also a system, a world dominating system, the beast system. So anything that says beast is relating to the Antichrist and its world system. So the beast is going to come out and it's going to attack them, overpower and kill them. So that's pretty amazing to me. So is it because this beast is so powerful? I don't think so. I think it's because this is all part of God's plan. And just like Jesus, I think it said that if the devil had known what was going to happen when he had them kill Christ, he never would have done it. And I think it's the same thing. History repeats itself again. If the devil and his kind had known what was going to happen when he killed these prophets, he never would have done it. So, because what's happening next? Their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, okay, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. Okay. Obviously, it's not Sodom. Sodom was destroyed in Genesis. And the ruins can be found today. Biblical archaeologists have found the ruins of that. Okay, so we wonder if it's a true story. Egypt, well, Egypt, in the terms of the Old Testament, was always considered to be a symbolic nomenclature label for worldliness, sin and worldliness and perversion, and especially idol worship, where also their Lord was crucified. Now we understand clearly that this is Jerusalem. Why? Because Jerusalem is the headquarters of Antichrist. Okay, so we wonder where he's residing. Doesn't mean he started there. It appears that he most likely starts somewhere else in the world, as far as at the beginning of 7 years. But eventually, he will set up his headquarters in Jerusalem. Of course, part of that is when he goes into the temple and sits there and says, "I'm God." Well, then that becomes his headquarters. That's the house of God, little g of the world. The little g of the God of the world is in the temple and rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. For 3.5 days, interesting, 3.5 years, 3.5 days, you see these numbers. There's like something called biblical numerics, not numerology, which is occultic, but biblical numerologies, like 1, 2, 3, 7, 12, 70, 120. A lot of these numbers you see over and over again in the scripture, and they have meaning. You don't use them to predict anything. It's just a matter of they have further significance. And you can look that up. For 3.5 days, some from every people, tribe, language, and nation. So what is that telling us? It is worldwide. Okay. Well, even now we can see everything that goes on in the whole world. You can watch CNN or any other news, and there's nothing happening in any corner of the world that you cannot be aware of. You know, it's what we were watching a series set in the World War II era the other day, and people were in America and said, "Wow, we hardly know there's a war going on." I mean, they have a little paper, you know, a little piece in the paper occasionally, but it did not affect them unless their sons and daughters were over there. Now it affected them. But I'm saying, and it's a lot like today, you know, if I didn't know that there was a potential conflagration and world war coming in the Middle East, I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but I'm saying the world is saying that. If I didn't know it and I just never had no media, just living my life, I have no idea anything's going on over there. They have to tell me everything, you know, and reinforce it because I have no idea what's going on over there. I have no people over there. So, but everybody in the world is going to see it. You have to understand, even 100 years ago or more, the Bible teachers of prophecy had no idea, and the people in the world had no idea. And they would talk about how in the world can everybody in the world see what's going on in the new temple and the 2 prophets being killed? How in the world could they see that? They were mystified. But then Daniel says in chapter 12, as we get closer to the time, the wise will understand. Wise means anointed by the Spirit and studying the scripture, just like he did. Okay, so they're going to refuse them burial. You know, that's the greatest insult. Shows you how much they hate them. They just look at them as dead dogs, you know, just leave them out in the street. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate. Boy, that's pretty evil. That's about as evil as you get. By sending each other gifts, because these 2 prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. All they did is talk. How could they torment people? They just said things. Well, because everything they said convicted those people of how evil they were and would continue to be. As far as I can see, nobody in that 3.5 years that takes the mark ever changes. And the word says they can't be saved. In other words, something happens when you take the mark that changes your entire identity. Somehow, I think you're no longer human. Yes, sir.
I heard my dad said, someone, I gave you the mark and you didn't accept it, that doesn't mean you're not accepting. Is that right?
Well, I'll let you look into that further and tell you what you find. As far as I can tell from the word, you know, you have a choice of accepting it or not, but once you've accepted it, no give backsies. That's what we said when I was a kid.
Give backsies?
No back, yeah, well, yeah, somebody gave me something. And you know, maybe you're probably a young guy, but when I was young, we'd say no give backsies, meaning you're not going to give it back to them, right?
By the way, thank you for that.
Okay, yeah, young people. I'd love to see young people. Okay. I just celebrated my birthday. I'm not going to tell you how old I am because Methuselah will be embarrassed. Okay. All right, here we go. So this is like a satanic Xmas. I say Xmas because it's not Christmas. Christ is not in it. It is truly an Xmas. So, you know, there's a great event, and unlike the resurrection and all that goes along with that event or the birth of Christ, this is the event celebrating 2 great men of God being killed by the evil emperor. Reminds me of the Star Wars guy. You know, he has this little, and he's all wrinkled up, and yeah, that's kind of the Antichrist to me. He probably doesn't look like that, but he paints a good picture. Okay. But after 3.5 days, whoa, now Satan's upset. He's a little upset right here. He's going, uh-oh, didn't see this one. Did not see this coming. And after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them and they stood on their feet. Can God resurrect people? You betcha. He's done it before. He'll do it again. He'll do it for us, the dead saints, when Jesus comes. But at any rate, Satan can't. Keep that in mind. God can resurrect Satan cannot resurrect. He has no such power. He does not have power of life. He only has power of death, right? John 10:10, the thief cometh only to kill, steal, and destroy. Let me rewrite that in the latest modern translation. Kill, steal, destroy, and give life if he wants to. Oh, nope. Forget that. That translation is not accurate. Okay. That's a whole nother thing. The wife and I got into it the other day. Since I look at all the translations, she wanted the best one. So I gave her what I thought was the best one. No plug for any translation. Okay. Anyway, terror struck those who saw them. What do you think? They've been having satanic Christmas, and all of a sudden, oh, can you even imagine? They're watching CNN or GBBN or whatever the thing would be, Antichrist World Network, AWN, and they're watching it, and these guys stand up on their feet, probably say things to witness against them, and go on up. And they go, oh man. I don't know what it means. I've always heard like the jig is up, whatever that means. It's probably a sailing term, but anyway, so the jig is up, and they go, "Oh, we're in for it now, pals. This is not going to end well." So, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, we've heard there was a loud voice at the time of the rapture. There's a loud voice when Jesus was baptized. There was a loud voice during his ministry, and they didn't understand what it was. But there's a loud voice. Anytime I think we have a loud voice, it's either God the Father or the angels. Come up here. Who else? Where else in the word of Revelation do we find come up here? It's only one other point that I remember, and that's what I mentioned earlier: rapture. Revelation 4:1, John was told, come up here. So what does that mean when you're told from heaven, come up here? It means you're taken to heaven. Okay. So in a sense, these two prophets are raptured. It's not really the same thing, but in other words, they're here and they're gone, right? So, and they went up to heaven in the cloud. It does sound a little bit like the rapture, right? And every eye shall see him, and he's going to come in the clouds and whatever. It also sounds like the second coming. While their enemies looked on. That's the good part. So I think in some way, not that God has to do it over time, just like in Acts chapter 1, where 1:9, where Jesus and after his stay on earth and his resurrection went up in clouds. The two angels were there, and they said, as you see him go up, he'll come back to the same place in the same way. I mean, God could have just gone, he's gone, right? But for some reason, I guess, I don't want to say for dramatic effect, but to make an impression. I think sometimes he does that. Sometimes he just goes, hey, check it out, He can do anything. That's the key. God is God. He will do anything, and we're not to judge him for what he does. So when you can create the world, then I'll let you do a little judgment on the Lord God. Otherwise, be humble. That's what I say. Anyway, they heard a loud voice and they went up, and again compared the clouds surrounding these two prophets to Luke 9:28-36, the Mount of Transfiguration. And as we go on, at that very hour, there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city collapsed, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. Of course, the city is talking about Jerusalem. Anytime we're talking about the city, we're talking about Jerusalem. Of course, that's where these two prophets were ministering. They weren't in New York. They weren't in Moscow. They weren't in Hong Kong. They were in Jerusalem. And the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. I think that's the survivors there is not, I am sure, not talking about those people who took the mark. It's talking about the surviving ones who managed to escape being killed because they didn't receive the mark. Because they're going to be aware of this also. The whole world will be aware of it. And they're going to give glory to God. Keep in mind, there's only one great earthquake in Revelation. And I'm going to show you some of that. We're getting a little bit long in the tooth here, 1152. But just to give you an idea of where we're going, we're going to look further in chapter 11, the second part of it. And that's where we're going to see the seventh trumpet. In the beginning of the course, chapter 6 last semester, I mentioned the four initial judgments, And then we have in the middle, the fifth judgment. And then we're going to have, as we go forth, we're going to find the rest of the judgments. And so we're going to study that next week. We're going to find out that the last three trumpets are called woes. That's like a secondary naming and nomenclature for them because they get increasingly worse.